Welcome to Lesson 16 of How to Understand Quranic Grammar series. After discussing the jar and nasb particles for both nouns and verbs, we now move to jazm particles. Unlike jar and nasb particles, jazm particles are only and exclusively used with present verbs, since nouns cannot be used in a jazm state. So let's get started with the jazm particles. There are many jazm particles which affect present verbs. We have lam, lamma, alam, and la, which are negation particles. And we also have in, ma, man, and aina, which are all conditional particles, which means they produce conditional sentences. And we also have li, which is called the lam of command, or in Arabic, lam al-amr. In this lesson, we will focus on the first group, which is the negation particles. Next lesson will be about conditional particles and lam al-amr. But first, let's see what kind of effects do these jazm particles have on the present verb in the Quran. As we learned from last time, present verbs typically are in raf' state, which means they end with dhamma. However, when a jazm particle is used, this dhamma is dropped and it is substituted by sukun. And it is the first effect that jazm particles have on present verbs. The second effect is very similar to what happens to present verbs with nasb particles. This effect can only be observed on plural or dual present verbs, so verbs that end with nun, like the verb tuqaddimun, which ends with nun because it is a plural verb. But this verb will look like this when it is in jazm state, and the nun will be completely dropped and it will not be pronounced. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُمْ. So the nun is completely dropped and we do not pronounce it at all. And the third possible effect happens to present verbs that end with a long vowel. So, waw, alif, or ya. And we call this type of verbs sick verbs or weak verbs. So a verb like tad'u is a weak verb because it ends with a weak letter, and that is waw. And this kind of verbs lose their last letter, so the weak letter or the long vowel, when they are preceded by a jazm letter. Like in this ayah, for example. فَلَا تَدْعُ مَعَ اللَّهِ إِلَهًا آخَرَ. So the original form of this verb is تَدْعُ with a waw. But the waw at the end of the verb here is dropped because of the effect of the jazm particle in this case, and that is the la particle. So these are the three effects of jazm particles on present verbs. Either sukun at the end of the verb, the deletion of nun, or the deletion of the weak letter. Now let's start by investigating the negation particles one by one and how they function in the Arabic sentence. And we start with the first one, and that is lam. Lam means did not. So when lam is followed by a present verb, this whole combination will be a past negation, like in this example. وَقُلِ الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ الَّذِي لَمْ يَتَّخِذْ وَلَدًا وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ شَرِيكٌ فِي الْمُلْكِ. So in this ayah, the verb يَتَّخِذ has sukun at the end of it, as well as the verb yakun, because they were both preceded by the jazm particle lam. Another example. وَأَقَامَ الصَّلَاةَ وَآتَى الزَّكَاةَ وَلَمْ يَخْشَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ. So here the verb يَخْشَ does end with fatha, but it is in fact in jazm state because the verb lost its last letter, which in this case was alif maqsura. So the original form of the verb is yakhsha with an alif maqsura at the end of it. And because of jazm, we say walam yakhsha illallah with fatha only. Remember, sometimes verbs in Arabic are used in the past, but they actually refer to future events and sometimes even events in the present. So this depends on the meaning of the sentence. And we'll be talking more about this topic in a future lesson, insha'Allah. Next is lamma, and it means not yet, like in this example. وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. However, lamma could also be used with the meaning of when. But when it is used with the meaning of when, it will not function as a jazm particle. But how can we tell which is which? Because the difference in meaning could be very big when it comes to understanding the ayah. Well, if the verb coming after lamma is a present verb, then it is used as a jazm particle with the meaning of not yet. But if it was followed by a past verb, then it would mean when. And lamma with this meaning of when is used very often within the stories of the Quran to tell the events of the story, like these examples. وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَهُمْ أَبُوهُمْ وَلَمَّا وَقَعَ عَلَيْهِمُ الرِّجْزُ قَالُوا يَا مُوسَى. So with lamma, to be sure what it means, you have to see what kind of verb comes after it. The next particle is alam, and it is the interrogative form of lam, because this combination is basically the questioning hamza added to lam. So it would then mean did you not, or whatever form of question suits the context. And though it is used to ask questions, in the Quran it is used to make what we call an establishing question, or in Arabic سؤال تقريري, which is a type of question with an implicit answer, and that the answer itself for the question is admitting what had or had not been done, just to establish a fact and make it known. Like when Allah asks, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلِ الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا. So here the function of the question is, yes, Allah has indeed made the earth a resting place. أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ. So again here, it is not a real question, but it is to establish the fact that Allah has indeed given man 2 eyes already. The last particle of today's lesson is la. And of course, we all know that la means no. But when it is used before verbs, specifically present verbs, it would mean do not in the sense of forbidding of an action, so giving a command, like what we see in this example. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم. So the verb يسخر here ends with sukun. So we can be sure that this la is a jazm particle, which is then a forbidding la, or what we call in Arabic la الناهية, giving the same meaning as a command. Now let us compare it to this la in this example. لا تفتح لهم أبواب السماء. We notice here that the verb تفتح is in a normal rafa state, which means that the la in this example works as a normal negation, and it doesn't contain any sense of command. So it is not a jazm particle in this case. So today we discussed the first 4 jazm particles and how they function and how they affect the present verb, which they can do in 3 ways. They can turn dhamma case ending into sukun by putting the verb in jazm state. Plural and dual verbs ending with noon, they lose their noon when they're preceded by a jazm particle. And verbs that have weak letter at the end of them, so waw, alif, or ya, they will lose their weak letter. Thanks for watching. If you want to start your journey to learn the tajweed of the Quran, you can click on this link. And if you want to understand the Quran in Arabic, then you should click on that link. And finally, I hope you've learned something new today, and I will see you next time.